countries of varying levels of development and growth and varying opportunities available finds it very difficult to add value extensively and create very wealthy nations. And so the idea of having IPAs, first and foremost, is to ensure that these IPAs direct investors in a strategic and very mutually beneficial way to the countries in which they operate. But we haven't seen that happen over a while. But now we have a real opportunity with the AFCFTA. And even prior to the AFCFTA, as I'm told, there had been discussions on how Africa can mobilize these opportunities into real growth opportunities. And there's been a lot of work that has been done. But under AFCFTA, it was very important that trade, and we all recognize that trade actually sits on investment. Without investment, you are unlikely to develop the opportunities for trade. If you have the resources, if you have the market, and there is absolutely no doubt that Africa is well endowed in those two. Today, Africa's population is 1.4 billion. By 2030, it will be 1.7 billion. By 2050, it will be 2.6 billion, 1/4 of the world's population. Every fourth person in the world will be from Africa or will be an African. So it stands to reason that if each individual country cannot optimize its opportunities, then there is a great opportunity under AFCFTA to also see how we can work together to capitalize on these opportunities for growth of the continent. And so with AFCFTA, there was a tacit recognition that we needed to harmonize all our efforts in investment to benefit the continent in a very strategic and mutually beneficial way. And that was the birth of PATIA, the Pan-African Trade and Investment Agency, because having recognized that we need to work together to optimize all these opportunities, then there was a need to have an agency that can come out with a set of rules, procedures, and principles, under which each of our 55 countries, or those with IPAs, actually create a uniform platform to enable us optimize and maximize the opportunity. But we also must agree, 55 countries at varying levels of development, varying levels of growth, means that everybody is probably looking at a different thing. And if we are all looking at different things and we are working across purpose, we will not achieve the great story we all expect from AFCFTA. So PATIA is very important. It's important to make sure that we have standardized templates, standardized rules, principles, and procedures that can make all of us mutually beneficial to this effort. And that is why it's happened. And I dare say that we have today a panel. Mine is to start the conversation. I think we all understand why we need to have this. But beyond that, I represent Sub-Saharan Africa on the World Association of Investment Promotion Agencies as a board member. So it's in my interest to make sure we can also harness what every IPA and every experience that each of the IPAs have. And so behind PATIA, we're also putting together the Association of African Investment Promotion Agencies, so that within ourselves, we can share experiences, we can share opportunities, and then with the help of PATIA, which will give us the technical expertise and perhaps the funding for some of the things that we want to do to make sure that we optimize the opportunity, we work together. And that is why we are talking about the synergies that we can build in investment promotion and facilitation. Just to give one last example before we go. Each country in Africa is very well resourced with something. Ghana has cocoa. And perhaps, as I'm told and as I know, there's a company in Rwanda that wants to do chocolate. So we find the common denominator between the two countries that can make sure that this happens. Ghana has cotton, Burkina Faso has cotton. We know that Morocco is assembling cars, South Africa is assembling cars, Kenya is assembling cars, Rwanda is assembling cars. How can we work together to make sure that we have a seamless investment platform to make sure that the cotton can be used for the vehicles in South Africa. The rubber from Liberia, Ghana can be used for vehicles in South Africa, Morocco, Rwanda, name it. So that is the synergies that we want to create with the formation of PATIA and the formation of the Association of Investment Promotion Agencies. It can only inure to our mutual benefit. And I think with that, I hand over back to you.
Very well said. Thank you, Yofi. Indeed, quite insightful. We will then move now to
5 minutes.
Rosalind Ngeno, which will give us what kind of provisions does the protocol investment and what is relevant from an IPA perspective and the potential impact on promoting intra-African investments. Please, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, moderator. And good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for making it here. So just drawing from
ARZO to develop a standard while they were standard at international level. Meaning, you start with international standard, you check if they meet the purpose of the continent. Then, if they don't, you develop the standards. But if they do, you don't develop an African Equality Institution. Why is it important to mention those institutions? When you talk about international standards, the setting bodies, they are many. They are many, but those ones that are really very influential and that African countries are members and are using the standard are mainly ISO on all standard and IEC on electrotechnical. Then the second level we have at the continent, the Africa Standardization Harmonization Model. This model is linking to the WTO requirement, is linking to what Muhika was talking about, that look at the international standard and look at the continental, look at the different levels before you develop standard at the national level. That's the key area that we should be looking at. Stakeholders developing the standard is not ARZO Secretariat, is not ISO Secretariat, is the industries themselves. Chair, when you look at our continent, and we have been following the discussions, everyone is talking about a standard. But industry's role to play is down there on the development of standard. But I always ask a question. Which industries do we have? I give you an example. When you look at 55 countries, almost 90% of our countries' national standard bureaus pay experts to come and develop the standards. While on other continents, Europe, America, Asia, experts are paying themselves because they have strong industries. They know those standards will influence the trade. We should ask ourselves, how do we go about this? Because the standards being developed are usually demand from the public, from the government. They are responding to the safety issues, to the needs of the government, not really like industry is looking at a standard to improve its performance. We should look into that. You influence the standardization work. You look at the innovation that we have been talking in the last 2 days. How can we help you? How can you bring the expert into the different technical committees? Lastly, Chair, is priority sectors. You don't just develop a standard. We used to have performance in the Bureau of Standard on the numbers of standards adopted. Currently, it's over. The issue is how many standards are being implemented. And the implementation should be on your priorities. You are dealing with agriculture product. Let's have standard in agriculture product. But if in your catalog you have aeronautic standard, what industry are you responding to? We have this priority from AFCFTA, agri-processing. Let's do standard in agri-processing. Pharmaceuticals. Yeah, let's do standard in pharmaceuticals. Transport, automotive. Let's focus on those standards. We will be responding to the need and implementation of AFCFTA. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, SG. One important thing you pointed out is the fact that standards elsewhere, the private sector pay to participate. And it is important for us to note that they are paying because they know he who forms the standard or influences the standard drives the market. So you are part of building the market. And I think this is a call to our private sector participants here to understand that as we work with ASO to harmonize standards and make new ones, it is important that we all participate. Another thing you mentioned is the idea of prioritization, and we have AFCFTA prioritization list, which I think with the help of ASO, we will make those standards available and harmonized. One silent area, you cannot read a whole page of standard without running into things that has to do with weights, measures, volumes, and all those kind of description. But you never hear them speak loud in many conversations. But in the implementation, you get caught by their requirement. And that is what we call metrology. So it will be my pleasure to hear, or our pleasure to hear from you, Dr. Wynan, the head of AfriMed's secretariat, from your point of view, when I say your AfriMed point of view, what are the real issues of quality infrastructure that AFCFTA and the players should be aware of and actually plan properly for when it comes to metrology?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. So yes, let me just quickly explain what metrology is, because we use this word, many people are not sure what we talk about, and it is, of course, the science of measurement. So the job of a metrologist is to make sure that the measurement that you do is, in the first place, as accurate as possible. In a second place, comparable to the same measurement done in other parts of the world. And then, of course, finally, internationally accepted. Otherwise, you can do the measurement, you can have a certificate of analysis or testing, and it's not accepted when you export your product to, say, the European Union. And this is then our job, and the system has got basically three main components. In the first place, the scientific metrologist, the International Committee of Weights and Measures, internationally, basically decides on the measurement system. So they basically say that the unit for mass will be the kilogram, and they define exactly what the kilogram is. The second part, the second component, is that you must then find a way to get everyone in the world to have traceability to that international standard, or a realization that we say these days of the international system of units. And we do that by then basically creating artifact standards that is then calibrated against that international realization of the unit. Or in the case of the kilogram, for many years there was an international prototype of the kilogram held in Paris at the BIPM, the International Bureau for Weights and Measures. So if you sign a meter convention, and there are 5 countries in Africa that has signed the meter convention, first Egypt, then South Africa, then Kenya, Tunisia, Morocco. We have copies of that international prototype of the kilogram, and we calibrate it there, bring it to Africa, and here we calibrate stainless steel standards, kilogram standards, for all the other countries in Africa. So in that way, we set up the system. Now, where does AfriMed then come in? Yeah, we is then the intra-Africa metrology system, that coordinates this whole process. And we actually now have 48 member countries. And it includes the scientific metrology and then also the legal metrology, where for a legal reason, there's a law that says that you must have a volume standard and make sure that your fuel pumps are calibrated. That's legal metrology. In the sense of the AFCFTA, we already have this system in place and we work very hard to establish metrology institutes in each country in Africa, or make sure there's a legal metrology section with calibrated mass standards, for example, that they can go and calibrate the scales used in industry. So that is already in place. What we're now looking at is to go that next step as the metrology institutes and make sure that Africa has the capability to test everything that we need to test. There's the standard, voluntary standard, there's the technical regulation, and the product standard and regulation will always include a test requirement. They will say, if you want to export your fruit to Europe, it says that you must test it for pesticides, and it must have less than a certain amount of pesticide in that product before it will be allowed into the European Union. And that is our challenge in Africa. It's fine to have the standards, regulations, everything, but we must be able to test against it. And that is what we do now as the metrologists. We go that next step with the AFCFTA, and we did a survey across Africa in the food arena, for example, food safety, and the agro-processing to check what is available, what gaps are there, and now we're working towards establishing physical laboratories, reference institutes across the continent to be able to do that testing. The other big thing that we do is certified reference materials for African matrix-based products. Just a good example is white maize, because white maize is only eaten in southern Africa. And we couldn't find reference materials for mycotoxins, for example. That's another EU regulation that you must test for mycotoxins in your products. And if we export white maize to Europe for feed, then we must test it for mycotoxins. So we had to develop that matrix white maize reference material with a known amount of mycotoxin. Here, we actually did it here in South Africa, and we're now distributing it to all the countries in Southern Africa that need that, calibrate the instruments in their testing facilities, and now they can test and give the certificate. Chair, let me stop there. I see that you are looking at me.
Yeah, no. Thank you, Dr. Lowe. One silent message is sent across, which if you're a manufacturer or someone packaging any product for readiness for AFCFTA, you need to understand. He kept using calibrated, calibration. Those words kept coming up. The message he's trying to send across is that it is not every laboratory is fit to do measurements for you. It's not every equipment that is in the lab is qualified to do measurements for you. It must have received a calibration that is traceable to their system. So you may never see AfriMet in your line of business, but those weighing balances, all those equipments that are in the lab where you are going to be testing your product, whether it's an agricultural commodity, must take traceable calibration from them. So I think it's important that we begin to send it home as where it belongs. And the best way to know whether those equipments are qualified to measure or carry out tests for you to ask is, are you accredited to do this measurement? Are you accredited to do this weighing for me? And talking about accreditation, so that gives me opportunity to invite the chair of AFRAC, African Accreditation Cooperation, to try, it's complex, but try to help us understand. We heard about standardization and how metrology speaks into the standards and the technical regulation, but something needs to give us confidence that those standards and the metrological language or requirements have all been met. And those who give us that confidence, I believe, is accreditation. So maybe for this trading, what do we need to know about accreditation to ensure that our trading is seamless? Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think you actually summarized everything quite nicely. But thank you very much. I think we have heard from standards. Standards is the issue of paper, a recipe, a way of how to do things. Okay. We heard from metrology, as Wynand has said, important, that traceability. So when we do a measurement of a millimeter here in South Africa, it should be the same millimeter that we should be able to measure anywhere else in the world. So the traceability and pulling through should be more or less the same in terms of that. But there's an old saying, I think in the Cold War times, I think Ronald Reagan said that, not that it's my namesake. He said, trust, but verify. Okay. So yes, we can say that in ourselves, we can say our products comply to our standards, to the A standard. But who's going to believe us? Okay. And I would assume there's a lot of us in this room who have probably tried to export goods and services just to get to that particular point where people don't want to accept it, because we didn't have the necessary, or they didn't have the necessary confidence that those goods and services complies to the requirements or to the standards or to the technical regulations or to any other requirement that a regulator or anybody else might impose on a particular product for their use and consumption as such. And that's the role, that's where accreditation comes in. We have what was mentioned earlier on conformity assessment bodies. Conformity assessment bodies are those bodies who do the testing, who do the certification, who do the inspection, and now recently they added verification and validation processes as well. So for your goods and services to be exported into another country, as Wynand said, they need to have confidence that those conformity assessment bodies are competent to perform the task. They don't know this conformity assessment body here in South Africa or in Ghana or anywhere else in the world, but they need to have the confidence that that body that's doing this testing or this inspection or this certification on behalf of them, to give them assurance that what they consume will protect their health, it's good for their health, it's good for the safety, it's good for the protection of the environment. So that's where accreditation comes in. Accreditation gives that confidence that the conformity assessment bodies, the inspection bodies, the certification bodies, the test laboratories are competent to perform that task. And it's done that through what we call the mutual recognition arrangement. Through that mutual recognition arrangement, the accreditation body takes that after verifying and after accrediting a conformity assessment body and promote that globally. Okay. It's done that through various bodies such as the International Laboratory Accreditation Corporation, ILAC, which manage the mutual recognition arrangement for inspections and for laboratories, and as well as the ILAC, which manage the IAF, the International Accreditation Forum, which manage the MRAs or MLAs for certification bodies, and now recently the verification and validation bodies as well. Signatories countries to that recognition arrangement are obliged to promote and accept the results of those conformity assessment bodies that has been accredited by those accreditation bodies who are signatories to those MRAs, mutual recognition arrangements. So in Africa, AFRAC is responsible for the management of the mutual recognition arrangements in Africa, and at this point in time, it covers quite a few of the areas that we are specializing in: certification, the laboratory testing, the inspection as well. We've got all of those scopes already covered. We're getting into much more specialized areas, environmental protection issues as well, where we need to expand. So in principle, what I'm trying to say is that there's a whole value chain that deals with the issue of quality and the end of the process of accepting the goods and services. And it's important for us to be able to understand and know the importance of that. So when we do export, or we want to export, and we want to get this interregional trade flow between us, it should be comfortable that if I sit in Mauritius, or I sit in South Africa, or I sit in Ghana, wherever I might sit, I have the confidence that I can rely on this goods and service. It's not going to cause harm, and that's where government's key responsibilities are: the protection of health, safety, and environment. Government wants to know that if we import these goods and services into our country, it's not going to cause harm to our citizens. Okay, so that's the important role that accreditation plays. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Again, when you have highly intelligent people on the panel, they pass a lot of information across, and sometimes we miss it. He just told us with all the stories that their work in accreditation is to be a witness that you, the manufacturer or producer in one corner, have obeyed all the requirements or the recipe on the standard, and you followed all the measurement as described in metrology. And therefore, a lesson to take from his interpretation is the fact that, again, it is not everybody who can test for you will give you a test result that can be accepted when you ship from Kenya to Congo under AFCFTA. You might say, oh, we have signed agreement. Yes. Oh, we have ratified. Yes. But he mentioned the key word, mutual recognition arrangement. The laboratories or certification body or inspection bodies that will issue you certificates of safety, certificate of whatever you are trading on, should come from those that have this mutual recognition arrangement. So we should be looking for accredited laboratories that are accredited within the family line, if I use that word, of AFRAC, or elsewhere in the world, because once accredited, accepted everywhere. That's what we say in accreditation. Now, we are speaking the process, quality infrastructure process, but the actual people who feel the pain are the SMEs. And this is why we have Florence here, and I'm coming to you, Florence. You are in certain value chain, maybe you tell the audience, with all that you hear them talk about standardization, metrology, accreditation, conformity assessment, and now I'm talking about certification and all things like that. In your experience in the field, what have you struggled with? And what is your fear about trading under AFCFTA, and now you think your product will be crossing many countries? I would like to hear from you, Florence.
Okay, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm so happy to be with the experts in the sector. Thank you so much. To me, it's very confusing because I was thinking, when I have my certificate, I can send my product everywhere. But listen to the expert right now, certification is different from standards. So if I want to sell my product in South Africa, that means I need to look for South Africa standard, right? If I get it right. So it can make the work a little bit complicated for SME like me. I want to sell my product in 20 countries. So that means I need to get 20 certification, 20 standards. End of the day, I'll be tired, right? So what I want to ask, if it will be like a standard for this free trade agreement where we can simplify everything together, so we don't need to be like all the time, you have to be doing these standards and standards. It will be a lot of work for these SMEs, right? Yeah. And then aside that, we don't have access to information. as an SME. So I'll take an example for an old lady who she's have a great product somewhere in the village. She doesn't have the information about this certification, standards, but she can export her product. Yeah. So all these things is all about access to information, capacity building, because as an SME, we need it.
Thank you, Florence. And you see, I think it's fantastic that she's here sharing her experience. You deserve a round of applause.
Thank you.
I will turn to the mic to SG maybe to respond to this, but I want to give you some confidence.
Yeah.
The reason why we have come together as Pan-African Quality in Infrastructure is actually to avoid the problem you just mentioned. To certify or get certificate from 20 countries or 55 countries, no. If that happens, that means everyone, all of us here have failed you. Yeah. Then we have failed the Africans. And what we're working towards, and I'm sure you hear it more and more in this conversation, is harmonizing standardization. That's why I say also we talk about it. Accreditation principles and processes harmonized already, and that's what Dr. Ron Josiah has presented. The same thing AfriMed. And so, Dr. Hemejum, just highlight to her a little bit how effort we've made to harmonize priority standards for AFCFTA. So that,
Thank you.
Seconds. Yes.
Just to make it worse, probably, there are even industrial standards where, as SME, you are requested to abide to the buyer, not even the country standard, the buyer asking you to abide to this standard. Yeah. Current music is on environmental standard, the sustainability standard. People are telling you, okay, I will check how many children are you using in your farm, do you have gender balance in your industry, and so on. But this issue is being addressed on what we call maturity model. The maturity model is 12 SMEs know the targeted market. From the level of bronze, you help the SME if you are trading in your own area at the national level. What are the requirements? Then if you are crossing the border, what are the requirements? And we are harmonizing the standard to have one standard for Africa, what we call one standard, one test, one certificate. Meaning, if we can have one standard, and mainly if we can influence the international standardization work, we will be having an international standard accepted everywhere. If it's not there, we have 1,600, more than 1,600 currently harmonized standard under ARZO. But the crucial matter is what you said, capacity building. Because starting a business, we should start thinking about standard, because it's a recipe, as what Ron is saying. Instead of having remedial action later, let's start thinking, I am going to agriculture to produce something. They are good agriculture practice. Yeah, should I start from there? Then in the whole process, there is good manufacturing practice. And you will be now able to have a laboratory, a certification body giving you easily the certificate after evaluation, after checking, because in the whole process, you started the business thinking about the standard. You may probably think about the cost. The cost is also an issue, probably we'll talk about that later. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, SG. I deliberately allow the Director of Trade and Competition to listen to these decision makers in a quality institution to finish all their narrative. And I'm wondering what is playing on your head right now with the responsibility you have of ensuring that trade happens. And as we call it, non-tariff barriers or non-tariff measures to trade. Now, these issues, if not managed well, inhibit trade. From the point of view of your responsibility in AFCFTA, what would you like to see us do as quality institutions, and what message are you able to send to SMEs that might be here listening to all this?
Thank you so much. You asked me what is in my head listening to this. What I have in my head, I remember when I used to play video games back in the day, and the last level would be the monster level. Yeah. Standards for me and the technical regulation is the end game monster for a video game called the AFCFTA. So it is well known it will be the final and most difficult area to tackle among 55 countries in Africa under the AFCFTA. But I want actually to double down on what Florence said. I'm listening like her to standards, ISO, what is the difference between the standards of ISO, what is the standard of ARSO, the accreditation, the measures, and all these technical lectures that I received. I'm sure many of my colleagues here received. I can see already the private sector, manufacturers from automotive, and the name of the game is making the technical regulation work for African business. The name of the game making this technical regulation, all this organization, regional organization or international organization, work for the AFCFTA. The AFCFTA in its essence is one single market. Yeah. That is the only thing we keep saying. It is creating single market. So you can't create single market with thousands and thousands of different standards and requirements. We can't promote a single market that is a majority is women and youth and small and medium enterprises, and request them to know, starting with what is the priority sectors for the AFCFTA. This information is not with everyone. So if we are saying we are developing only standards for the priority sectors of the AFCFTA, that we are making another barrier, we are creating another barrier. If we are expecting them to know what is the difference between AFRIC and AFTIC and ARSO and ISO, they will ask, if my country is a member of ISO and member of ARSO, for example, so by default, why my product that I'm producing in South Africa is not accepted in Egypt? That goes without saying. This is the first question. So why the business sector, the individual, should be concerned with all these different names of the organization? For them, they need one point of entry. Am I trading under the AFCFTA? I will go have a certificate of origin of the AFCFTA, and I have one set of accepted or acknowledged standards. So it is upon us, the technical experts. We have here a team of technical experts in standards, in accreditation, and in all this area. There is other experts in competition. I'm working with them. They have their own also arena or their own mold. So it is up to this group to find a way to make all this arena of standards and accreditation work for business, work for the AFCFTA, work toward single market. If it is harmonization, let it be. If it is unification, let it be. If it is approximation, let it be. So, but we need a realistic solution, a realistic solution that can be divided in phases. Yeah. Short term, mid term, long term. We can't promise harmonizing standards or tackling the standard among 55 countries is not an easy task. Yeah. So what is possible in the short term, in the next 2 years? We need to know that, and we need to promise that, and we'll be accountable for that. what is possible within the midterm. Can we handle the automotive? I see the automotive AAM representative here waiting eagerly to open the floor to come and ask us, so what that mean for me? So can we promise AAM now that we will handle the automotive standards in the upcoming 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? We need to be able to answer that question. We executed the Guided Trade Initiative. I'm sure everyone heard about the Guided Trade Initiative, and I'm so honored that I have Florence with me. She participated in the Guided Trade Initiative. For the success of the Guided Trade Initiative, we used our, let's say, soft power as a secretariat to know what is the product that is being exported and go to the other end and make sure and understand what is the requirements in terms of standards, in terms of tests, and pre-shipment make sure that is being processed. But for a small and medium enterprises that does not have access to the secretariat or does not have access to the Guided Trade Initiative tools, that is an untarry barrier, like you said, and that will continue to be. So it is again, and I want to end here, I'm inviting, from the AFCFT Secretariat, invite everyone here in the room. Let's put our mind together. Let's have a deep dive session to roadmap the actual things that we can do to address the standards. In the past, the AFCFT had a similar situation. We have a similar international set of rules that is being done on the WTO. We have a set of rules that is being done on a regional level, in Africa level, and within the AFCFTA structure, we were able to strike the balance where needed. So we can do that again in the standards, but it is about time to start tackling this issue of standards for real, and I think the starting point is making the data available. Let's start from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Thank you so much. Your invitation to work with your office in getting all this done is well received, and I'm sure I have confidence in the men sitting side by side with you that we are going to get this done. This session was supposed to run beyond this, where we are now, but I just got a protocol request to end.
Oh.
Yeah, hold on. It's beyond this level. I think a high-powered message is sent to end this session. But before we end, we just opened the conversation for very big and important issues. I think we need to give assurances to the audience who are the consumers of what we are doing. This conversation will not end here. Pan-African quality infrastructure will continue working even behind the doors for us to address the issue of sanitary and phytosanitary issues for you to be able to also trade your products. On TBT issues, we've been discussing technical regulation and standards. Those are assurances from the point of view of these institutions. We can assure you we're working on it. And I think the ultimate goal is coming to a point where whether you're in Nigeria, whether you're in Ghana, whether you're in Kenya or whatever country or the South Africa, if you're able to register or certify your product in that country, the system in place should be sufficient enough to allow that product to travel around the AFCFTA territory. That is the goal. And I think I have that firm promise from the institutions that we can achieve this. Unfortunately, we can't continue this conversation. I have more than 5 more questions to ask each of them, but I'm asked to stop. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me thank you for coming. I want to thank the panelists and thank Mohamed Ali for making this possible. I will also place a request on your office. You see, this is why we wanted this conversation in the plenary, because it's very important. It affects everybody. So that next time we have this kind of gathering, whether it is the intra-Africa trade fair or any other, we need to discuss this issue which is plaguing the SMEs. And it's very important that it's seen as a front burner. So kindly accept my apology. We have to stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yep, let's go.
Beyond our